Burton for 5 minutes.
Well, first of all, let me just say that the problem started in 1994 when you loosened up, and you weren't here, none of you were here, when we loosened up the underwriting standards to give loans to people who cannot afford to make the payments is crazy. I was an underwriter for an insurance company for a long time, and I know how that system works. You just don't do it. And it's not rocket science. The minute you give a loan to somebody who doesn't have the capability to make the payments, then you've created a mess that is inevitably going to end in disaster. And that's what you inherited. Now, you, Mr. Williams, were there for 20 years. I don't know how you didn't see part of this, but nevertheless, the problem was pretty apparent to somebody that has any idea how finances work. Let me just ask a couple of questions. You had an outside entity make a recommendation on compensation, and then you as conservator, Mr. DeMarco, made a recommendation to the board, and that was pretty much approved. Is that the way it works?
I had responsibility for the final decision, Mr. Burton.
So you made the decision on compensation?
Ultimately. This work was well underway before I became acting director, but ultimately,
you were the one. Well, we talked a little bit about this before. For legal counsel for public companies, and I heard what you said about the expertise of these guys. The 2010 salary for public companies was averaging about $266,000, and with the bonus, it was about $104,000. So it was around $400,000. For a private company, the salary was $204,000, and the bonus was around $100,000. Now, under Freddie Mac, Robert Bostrom, the general counsel, got $2.9 million in 2010, and Timothy Mayopoulos, the general counsel, got $2.6 million in total compensation in 2010. I understand that they had the expertise, and I understand they had to have a good staff in order to make sure that the litigation was processed and pursued in a very rapid way. But that just seems very excessive to me. And Mr. Williams and Mr. Haldeman, I'm sure, are competent in many ways. I don't have the time nor the inclination to go into their qualifications. But when you look at the salaries and you realize the problems that the country faces, it's just excessive. I don't think anybody that looks at this would disagree with that. And I'm very disappointed. Then you talk about being very cognizant of the taxpayers' money. I think I'm very disappointed that this kind of pay is being given with the bonuses and everything when it's far in excess of the private sector in most cases. And you inherited a lot of the problem. Don't misunderstand. I understand that. And the underwriting was terrible before. And I don't know how in the world we're going to get out of this quagmire, but the fact of the matter is it is excessive, and I think it needs to be corrected. We have to have competent people. We have to make sure we have competent people that can do the job. But I think that when you start giving these salaries out to these people, you have to make absolutely sure you're not being excessive. And Mr. DeMarco, I'm sure you're trying to do the job to the best of your ability, but I hope you'll try a little bit harder as long as you're the conservator. And if you have recommendations on what Congress can do to help deal with this problem, I'd sure like to see it. I'd like to see Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac be done away with and go back to the private market where sound business principles are applied to make sure that qualified people are buying these houses instead of trying to help everybody out, especially those who can't afford them. You just dig a bigger and bigger hole, and that's why this country is in the mess that it is right now. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
From former chairman to former